And thank you so much for coming. It's so nice to see you all. I'm Megan Ryerson. I'm the chair of the Department of City and Regional Planning, and it's really my privilege to welcome you to this event. As I said, I'm here to introduce Akira Drake Rodriguez, who's going to more formally introduce the event and our speaker. You all know Akira. Akira is an assistant professor in city and regional planning at the Weitzman School of Design. Her research is at the intersection of race, place, and political power. She's the author of Diverging Space for Deviance, The Politics of Atlanta's Public Housing, and she's the co-editor of the forthcoming Penn Press series, Disrupting Urban Policy. Akira is also, beyond being a critically important scholar and researcher in this space, a steadfast and completely dedicated mentor and advisor for our students. And to have her at the helm of this program for so many years has just been so powerful and really shaped it into what it is. And we're just really so lucky to have her in the department working in all of these capacities. So thank you, Akira, for bringing us together tonight and so many other times. Thank you. Thank you.
Hi, thank you, Megan, for the lovely introduction. Thanks, everyone, for coming out tonight. It's so wonderful to see so many faces that are so familiar. Welcome to our second annual Moelis Lecture that is generously provided with the funding of Ron Moelis and the Moelis Fellowship. We have many Moelis scholars and Moelis Scholar alum, Julian, Chris, Hey, Jared, who else is here? David and Layla, I saw our current students. There are people here. Hi, Sarah, I see you're trying to hide, but hi. And more will be coming in, so I'm very excited. This year, our speaker, Beatrice Sibblies, is the managing partner of BOS Development, a real estate development and brokerage firm based in Harlem, New York. With a focus on community development and entrepreneurship, BOS creates the spectrum of projects necessary for a vibrant community, including residential, educational, hospitality, and commercial developments. She was the developer of 88 Morningside, a highly successful condo project in Upper Manhattan. Her current projects include the Hilton Motto in East Harlem with 224 rooms, and Village Price, which we're going to talk about today, a seed to culture brand. In her leadership of BOS, Ms. Sibblies brings a track record of financial innovation as a former investment banker and a deep commitment to building communities. Beatrice is alum of Penn, graduated from Morton's MBA program. Prior to that, she worked at JP Morgan Chase, acting as a first vice president of emerging markets, and later as a vice president of structured finance. She also served as the assistant vice president of economics for the Lower Manhattan Development Corporation, an entity created by the New York State government after 9/11. Ms. Sibblies immigrated to the U.S. from Jamaica on a student visa and graduated from Yale with a major in economics and political science. She received her green card in 2000, became an American citizen in 2005.
Wow.
Also earned an MBA from Wharton School of Penn. She serves on a number of nonprofit boards, including Harlem Park to Park, the Urban Design Forum, Higher Heights for America, and New Majority NYC. So please, let's give a round of sound and welcome Beatrice Sibblies.
So am I live?
Yes.
Okay. So hi, everybody. My name is Beatrice Sibblies. As you know, I came to the U.S. on a student visa and got my green card. But I'm from Jamaica. And the talk that I'm giving today is a little bit of a personal story of how I left from being a little island girl to coming to the U.S., ultimately becoming a real estate developer. And why I'm happy to share that with the students today is maybe as you are in your journey, have been talking to some of the Moelis Fellows, maybe there are lessons that you can learn as you build your real estate. Village Spice is a real estate brand in the making. So you are actually getting the sneak preview. I actually submitted it for the first time with my colleague Thomas Hagos to the Atlanta Beltline last week Monday. So this is the first. It's been an idea that I've been developing for a bunch of years, and it is a brand that is both a real estate brand, and Sneak Preview is ultimately positioned to be a hotel brand, and is ultimately positioned to be a consumer products brand. So it's really looking at creating space in reverse. So often you have CPG products that then become places like Hershey Factory. So we're looking at this, how do you actually do it in reverse? How do you establish place first, and then from place and experience, create product? So at some level, you were asking me today, what did I learn? At Wharton, I was a Wharton student, and the part of Wharton that I ultimately focus the most on is entrepreneurship. So I think you will see that in the talk. So that was kind of the high level preview. As designers, we often face on designing with nature. UPenn is very famous for that. Equally critical, and thank you, Thomas, for putting it in quotes, because I said it to him and he wrote it down and put it in quotes. So thanks, Thomas. Equally critical is designing with economic systems. And so many times as designers, economic systems feels like Greek, right? And so my challenge to the students is to be as comfortable in understanding economic systems as you are landscape systems. And how did I end up there? So this concept of village spice came to me during COVID. Because something happened in COVID that reminded me of when I was growing up. So when I was growing up in Jamaica, Jamaica was going through an economic shock. So my most formative years were living through an economic shock. And when COVID happened, there were aspects of COVID that reminded me of that economic shock. And what was happening in that economic shock? So Jamaica became independent in 1962. I was born in 1968, so you can do the math. And we had a prime minister by the name of Michael Manley. And some of you, I was pitching for details with Layla and David, correct? And I understand that in your urban studies programs, you look all the way at colonialism. Well, my early childhood experiences were dealing with the unfolding of the unraveling of Jamaica's colonial agricultural ecosystem. So I was born in a town up here, Monique, good job, Thomas. You actually got it on the map. And then I grew up in Kingston. Are you guys familiar with Jamaica? The way that Jamaica is structured, the export agricultural sector is along the lower coast. So all the sugar plantations are here, the banana plantations are there. And we had a prime minister named Michael Manley, and he came in and he did a couple things. Are there any Jamaican expats in the room? So honorary. So he nationalized industry. So he nationalized all the plantations, and he also nationalized the education system. So it was a complete economic shock. So I got to go to the best private high schools because I tested into them. So imagine that they just privatized Andover and Exeter, and you had to test into them. On the other hand, our economic infrastructure was in ruins. And so I spent my youth, and I thought it was fun. You had to go to the supermarket, and you only could buy limited amount of items. You could buy 2 pounds of flour, and you have to go to, and the way that we ameliorated that was by cultivating as much as possible in our yard. So our yard was an orchard. And we had a family farm way back up in the hills. So for my entire childhood, I would literally watch this ecosystem in dysfunction, driving all the way from Kingston up through the winding mountain roads, getting food and bringing it back to a city with no food. And when I was growing up, I was an active gardener, and I actually thought I was going to become a botanist. But there are two people that really affected me. So one is our friend, Mr. Manley. The other person that really shaped me, and I often say I learned one thing in every school. I thought Archimedes was like the coolest guy. And I remember, if you remember your classroom days, the point of a fulcrum. If we can put your lever at the right point, you can achieve anything. So that actually was something that just became a big part of the way that I think about the world, which is, what is the one or two things that you can change that have lasting change? And so when I came to the US and I went to Yale, I was, a campus activist. I actually was in the anti-apartheid movement, etc. And a lot of people were really surprised when I graduated that I didn't go and save the whales. I didn't go and save the world. I went to Wall Street because it was clear to me that the way to have an impact is by having a deeply ingrained understanding of the financial markets. So yes, I would support TA. I was a banker at Morgan Stanley, and then after that, I actually went to JP Morgan and I became the Mexican sovereign debt analyst, and I ultimately did structured finance when they were starting the markets. After JP Morgan, I went and worked after 9/11 at the Lower Manhattan Development Corporation, and I missed including that I also then after that got my Wharton Executive MBA. And then I went off and I started my own development company. And this was my first project, 88 Morningside. It won, I'm pretty anal. It won above, my first project, 80,000 square feet, 74 apartments, won many design awards, formed really strong partnerships. But something struck me when we were selling the units. And what struck me when we were selling the units was the lack of diversity among the buyers. Even though the price point was very accessible, there were very few African-American buyers. We had, in 74 units, we had one African-American buyer who was a personal friend of mine. We had one legacy French person of African origins. So can you imagine that? It's Harlem, it's 74 units, and there was only one African-American buyer. And that is when, to the point that we were discussing, Layla, when you think about the interaction of affordable housing and community development, New York has become a two-track system. So what is that two-track system? You either have luxury housing or affordable housing. And the kind of community that you build with that kind of bifurcated housing production leads to the election night that we saw last night. Is that self-evident? And when you do that for long enough, it becomes crisis. And I would say now that we have come to a point that in urban markets such as New York, or systems of housing production are in crisis. And there is no clear way out. Because in New York, you can't build yourself out of this problem because there just isn't any more land. And the cost of subsidy is so high that there is limits of what you can do. So, God bless the mayor-elect in New York for focusing on the problem. But the actual solution is going to be very, very difficult. One of the things that I then did is that, to show how I got to Village Spice, is I said, look, you could choose. You could choose to develop more luxury housing. You could choose to develop more affordable housing. But these tracks are going to lead you to exactly where we ended up. And so I put water all over myself. But I went into a different direction. And I created a merchant association called Harlem Park to Park. And what do we do in Harlem Park to Park? In Harlem Park to Park, we organized the local high-quality restaurants. And in 2010, in all of Harlem, there were 6 high-quality tablecloth restaurants, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Harlem with a population of 500,000 plus, 6. I don't know if anyone knows Sylvia's and, yeah, not in your head. And so what we did is then we followed the playbook, and this is where you mix development with PPP. PPD, Public-Private Development, PPD, is I went to a friend of mine who was then working for the Bloomberg administration, and I asked for some models, because why recreate the wheel? And she told me about an organization called the Meatpacking District Initiative. Are you guys familiar with the Meatpacking District in New York? So the Meatpacking District used to be literally blood on the streets, right, and a red light district. And in a short period of time, placemaking, they were able to transform that to now it is the nosebleediest part of the Manhattan real estate market. And so what we did is we went and spoke to the local group, the Meatpacking District Initiative, and they told us how they did it. And sometimes it's shocking how simple something can be. So a lot of attempts at placemaking use business improvement districts. You familiar with business improvement districts? Business improvement districts organize landlords. In communities like Harlem, the landlords often and majority do not live in Harlem and do not have a vested interest in transitioning the community. They are coupon cutters. What the Meatpacking District did is it organized the merchants, and it used cool as the organizing ethos. So one of the early members of the Meatpacking District was Diane von Furstenberg and her fashion company. And she got other super cool people. And one by one by one, the cool kids came together, and the next thing that you had within 10 years was the complete transformation of the Meatpacking District. So we said, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. So that's what we did. We started out with 6 restaurateurs, 1 retailer, myself developed, and I keep forgetting who I was. And we imitated the playbook. And we would have a harvest festival and just set up tables, and the restaurants would show what they had to eat for $5. And did it year after year. And then we did Battle of the Bars. And we had Hendrick's Gin, so corporate partnership, come in and do trainings for our bartenders. Now, they were happy to do it. Why was Hendrick's happy to do it? Because otherwise their salespeople would have to go from restaurant to restaurant, knocking on doors and asking, can I speak to the owner? But here what we did is we organized the marketplace. We got all the restaurants together. And then Hendrick's came in and trained all the restaurants. Very simple, all the restaurants then started to have happy hours. So Harlem went from being a place where you couldn't get a decent cocktail to having the best bar scene in Upper Manhattan. I stopped counting when we crossed 50 restaurants. 50. Now, pound for pound, the nightlife experience in Harlem is as good as anywhere else. But it wasn't complicated, right? Sometimes what it takes to create that tipping point is not what it seems. It goes back to the point of my discussion. It is organizing and creating an ecosystem. Do you know how hard those bartenders fought each other to win Bartender of the Year? It was war. It was war. It was war. And when you have restaurants, the profit comes from the bar. So in a short period of time, we worked ourselves out of a job. How am I doing on time, Thomas? And we started to focus on makers. And we organized makers. And when Whole Foods was coming to Harlem, we put 19 makers into Whole Foods. Do you know how hard it is for an individual entrepreneur to get into Whole Foods? We had the #1 buyer for Whole Foods sitting in our farmers market for 2 consecutive annual harvest festivals. Public-private partnership. We then partnered with Columbia University, the Community Development Corporation, the Economic Development Corporation food incubator, and we got all these makers shelf ready. They went from being in one Whole Foods, right? The hot sauce woman went from being in one Whole Foods to being in 15 Whole Foods. It doesn't sound that hard. I have not, when COVID came, we were up to 300 businesses. Of those 300 businesses, those above 30 did not exist when we started the organization. We branded the neighborhood. We put a map around in Harlem from Central Park North, Park to Park, Marcus Garvey Park, 5th Avenue, Morningside Park, 10th Avenue, 125th, and then 135th. And we made it sexy cool. So then that got me thinking, there's something in this cool shit, pardon my French. Culture is big business. And communities like Harlem over-index on culture. And what do they over-index on? Food. When we had the folks making our hot sauce, when they went from being makers in their kitchens, they were kind of then stuck in a donut hole. Because yes, there is a very robust market if you've got a large-scale contract. By the way, when you go into the Whole Foods, as one of the chefs told me, almost everything of the pasta sauce aisle is made in one factory in Pennsylvania. One factory, 40,000 square foot factory, makes all the pasta sauce of all the main New York players, 365 rounds, etc. Because that is how the food industry is structured. It's shared infrastructure. But for you to be able to get on that line, you've got to be making an order for 50,000 units, 100,000 units, right? So between when you're in your kitchen making 100 bottles and 100,000 bottles, you're stuck. So then I came up with the idea of a WeWork of manufacturing. We manufacture. And that is what Village Spice does. It basically aggregates and creates a shared infrastructure. It's like Uber, to allow emerging entrepreneurs to scale by focusing on the food industry. As of today, 2025, there is no major African American food brand. There's Uncle Ben and Aunt Jemima. Am I missing anything? Village Spice will be that brand. It'll be an umbrella brand, but it also will be its own brand. So where are we going to put this building? New York is really expensive. I tried 4 or 5 buildings in Harlem. I tried a couple buildings in the Bronx that doesn't pencil. this lovely gentleman over here said, why are you wasting your time? Why don't you go to Atlanta? Atlanta happens to have the best zoning for urban agriculture in the country. Thank you, 2013, done. Atlanta happens to have IMIC zoning that allows for the intermixing of retail, industrial, agriculture, and residential. Done. The Atlanta Beltline was doing an RFP for 14 acres on the Beltline that was primed for an agri-tourism destination. Done. We hustled and submitted an RFP last week Monday. So what did we look to do with that RFP? We looked into the RFP to see how you could replicate village spice, the process of creating a village. First you settle, get a house, right, the Lenape, or get a tent, or a teepee. You savor, make sure you have provisions for the winter. You cultivate, right? You craft. You might can some of the tomatoes, or you stay a while, and you invite your friends. You celebrate the harvest festival. So this is what the Beltline asked us to respond to, which is a traditional urban design structure. Mega blocks, yes, they designed with nature in mind. This is the Atlanta Beltline. This is the Harlem native called Pittsburgh Yards. It's an African-American community. It is a food desert. And they created these blocks. They did introduce a stormwater park. They were very focused on an attractive natural environment. But it felt a little locked in. So we worked with Stantec. Kudos Stantec, I said I'd give you a shout out. Paid Stantec, strong team, hustled with us, and opened up the footprint. So now this residential faces the Beltline without obstruction. This residential has views of the green. This residential has views of the green. And in cracking open a knot, we created a center spine of commerce. Because so many urban communities are not only food deserts, they are job deserts. And how can you learn to be industrious as a child if you don't see it? So we put industry at the heart of the village. Right? What is the industry? So this is a 30,000 square foot greenhouse, grocer. We upped it a little bit. 30,000 greenhouse on top. Then here is where we put the bee manufacturer. 50,000 square feet of shared manufacturing and kitchens. Now, why is that good business? The rents for industrial are $17 to $20 a foot. You make more money when you rent by the hour. By creating shared kitchens, your net effective rent can be as high as $100 a square foot. Yes, your fit out costs are higher, right? Because you got to buy the bottling line. But that's when you have to call your friends, your banker friends, and use things like new market tax credits. And food ecosystems, funding food ecosystems is a priority for many of the CDFI, Community Development Finance Institutions, that apply for new markets tax credits that have been now made permanent under the big, beautiful bill. So this is what it looks like at night from above. The idea is it's 500 units of housing. We're doing what is called an agrihood, where the entire landscape is an edible garden. If you could see closer down, you'll see that there's spice gardens, there's rooftop gardens. So the idea is, like the way I grew up in Jamaica, home is an orchard. The community was already doing farmers markets. We're taking that up a notch. we're putting in a food hall and farmers market along the Eastern Spine, calling this Spice Walk. Here, in addition on what we call the Beltline Food Innovation Hub, this commercial and manufacturing crosses over to something we're just making up called the Museum of Spice. What's the Museum of Spice? Making it up. It's like a museum of ice cream. And we're going to create an experience of spice. Spice is one of the biggest, oldest, most profitable businesses in the world. If you study your history, wars have been fought over spice. And so we're going to have a little fun and create a museum of spice. And if that wasn't enough, here's the Museum of Spice. We're going to create a moon garden, like the jewel at the Singapore airport, so that you have a garden above ground in inclement weather or just a hot summer day. You have an indoor garden. And then while we're at it, a hotel brand called Village Spice Hotel. Not ambitious. Budget would be 300 to 400 million in 3 phases. Village Spice. Questions, comments?
Yeah, I have a mic to pass around for questions. Yeah, please.
Thank you so much for being here. It's really an exciting project. I used to do a lot of research on entrepreneurship, and one of the things that was most challenging from my perspective was when a lot of people went into business because they loved making the cake or braiding the hair or whatever it was, and then the scaling up becomes so challenging, and you have to be a boss and a manager, and you stop baking the cake, you have to figure it out, and so I'm wondering what kind of support you provide to the entrepreneurs to help them achieve that scale when they go from 100 bottles to 1,000 bottles, because that's a lot.
So I have built an ecosystem, and we have an interdisciplinary team. One of the members of my team is a gentleman, and everyone on my team is an entrepreneur and has their own business. So one of the entrepreneurs in our ecosystem is a gentleman by the name of Richie Hecker, and his company is called Traction and Scale. And he is a public-private partnership person. He helped get ventilators for New York during COVID. He specializes in complex supply chain and logistics. So another person on our team is Ricardo Cordero from Ricardo Foods. He's an advisor to leading private equity firms. And they work with him when they have a product that's taking off that they want to help him scale. So he has a nice encyclopedic knowledge of the food manufacturing infrastructure in the country. Chef Daryl Schuler, an advisor, the first African-American certified master chef. So basically what we've done is we've created an advisory board of best-in-class experts. Because one of the things, when I was doing it in New York, Starbucks had wanted to support emerging food companies. And they wanted to support, this was right after COVID, they wanted to support emerging food companies with a simple requirement that the emerging companies that have African-American and Latino-owned companies that were making revenues of $500,000 in New York. I found 2. 2. And they funded one of the 2 at $250,000. Just because this issue that you talk about is so hard. And we interviewed 10 of the top companies, and guess what? They all wanted their money to do the same thing, to hire a chief marketing officer, to hire a chief operating officer. They all needed the same person, but they couldn't afford it. So what Village Spice does, it basically creates a shared, something that in entrepreneur class 101, you get an outsourced CFO, right? We're not recreating the wheel here, right? You get an outsourced CMO, and you divide it against 8 companies.
Thank you.
I have a question about procurement as you phase in the types of businesses that will exist in Village Spice. Who are you looking for all scales, and then what is like your plan of bringing in folks? And what does that look
I like to say I'm a curator, not a creator. So I've already called the University of Georgia, Georgia Tech University. They have a food and beverage accelerator. Right, so ideally, and my point to them is I would like to have the alumni of your program be the users of our space. Again, building ecosystems, right? Similarly, we got to win the RFP, but would go to Morehouse, Spelman, Emory, etc., and do the same. Because what happens is, Thomas and I spoke with Emory. Yeah, the challenges to the early question, there's so many entrepreneurial training programs, but they don't scale. You're nodding your head. So we're providing the structure for scale.
Really inspiring presentation. Thank you very much. Also very practical. It sounds like you're sort of an adopted New Yorker, having spent most of your career there. So I'm really interested in what were the practical concerns that were leading you to try this concept in Atlanta and not New York? Is it a matter of just the cost of business in Atlanta? Is it there greater encouragement for entrepreneurship? Are there financing programs available there? Maybe all of the above? Could you say a little bit more about why you traded in your New York address for Atlanta?
Yeah, so what was happening in New York, zoning, is Harlem has 2 micro pockets that are zoned industrial. 1, 2. Because there are only 2 micro pockets that are zoned industrial, the cost for those industrial sites are $200 a foot. So to deliver 40,000 square feet, the budget was $40 million. The effective rent, just to make it pencil, started at $45 a foot for industrial. Food, you know the algebra. That's not a good starting place, right? Then I tried the Bronx, and earlier this year we were going to buy an existing building in the Bronx, and we would have bought that building and gone ahead, but we were paused by this tariff uncertainty, which is putting a lot of manufacturing on its back feet while people figure out the environment. But what I was having to do in New York is I could not create a campus, right? So the residential would be, I was going to do the residential in upstate New York, the hotel in East Harlem, the factory in the Bronx, and the museum in Harlem. And finding financing for all of these, like it made me look, going to get this finance was very complicated. What this does as a financing vehicle is that by phasing it, the phasing is counterclockwise proposed. You do the residential first, then you do the industrial, you do the affordable. So this is the affordable housing to set this tone. Then you do the industrial, then you come back around, then you do the market rate housing and the hospitality. So you actually phase it by risk cycle. So what Atlanta provides, and by putting them all together, it actually allows a more effective execution. The IMIX zoning does not exist in New York. And 14 acres in New York, good luck. So whether we win this side or not, I think Atlanta is where the pilot should be. It also helps that when I talk about this in New York, there is a perception in New York that this is small business, right? People look at food and entrepreneurship and see it as a small business, especially because in New York you've got finance and you've got media. The feedback that I've gotten in Atlanta so far is there is more of an understanding that it's, like people still manufacture in Atlanta. This site is 10, 15 minutes from the largest airport in the country. The demand for third-party logistics, right? Like this isn't French to Atlanta. It's just straight up English. And so that's one of the things that, one of the slides that I had earlier, this was tough for me because I wanted to do New York. But as a developer, you have to understand, am I going to just keep, fighting uphill or move to a market where it makes sense? And so the markets that I have in mind are Atlanta, Memphis, Jamaica, Grenada, on the African continent, West Africa, Ghana, Senegal, on the East Coast, my colleague's country, Ethiopia, and Kenya, right? And so this is, it's a replicable model. It does, also from a weather perspective, there's just less that you can do with outdoor edible agriculture in the Northeast market. So it just made more sense. So once I let New York go, it just started to breathe a little better. Question?
Hi, so I'm someone who also wants to start in a different industry and pivot to having my own development company. How would you go about forming a team of people that would allow you to do something like this? Because I know that a lot of it is coming from the one person who's leading, but having people who can navigate zoning, financing, all of that, kind of how did you build that team?
Thomas, you want to answer that? How did we get together?
Thank you. I think you just do it. There's no, one of my professors, he was a professor of entrepreneurship and real estate development, and he was asked in a class, how does one become a developer? I think that's the question, right? How does one become a developer? He said, I'm not a creator, I'm a curator. The moment you decide that you want to be a developer is the moment using the resources. A lot of times, how I started, right? For example, I didn't have the right resources and the right contacts to connect with the global architects, even though I had experience working with one of the best and finest architecture firms in the world in a different project. That I didn't have that, I didn't have the resources, I didn't have the money. So what I did was using the resources that I have, classmates. Hey, I'm working on this project, and when you really have something that makes sense, people can sense that, and they want to support you. I think one of the things that I notice in our generation is we feel like the world owes us something, and then we expect something to come to us. But you just go. Becoming a developer is one of the hardest jobs in the world. If you're not comfortable, with pushing people, pressing people, things like that, then that's not for you. And yeah, using the resource that you have is simple answer that I guess. Thanks.
I will add one thing to that, and I think Thomas is one of the things I think that I'm really good at. I think we were talking, David, and I like to say people say that they're a refugee of banking. I mean, a refugee from law. I say I'm a refugee of banking. It became clear to me that my single most important skill is not finance. My single most important skill is the art of enrollment. Do you know what I mean by the art of enrollment?
Like getting other people to join in on stuff?
So when I was applying to Wharton, right before I applied to Wharton, I don't get paid for saying this. Right before I applied to Wharton, I did a program called the Landmark Forum. Some people think it's a cult. Some people, it's like est or whatever. That was the single most important entrepreneurial experience of my life, because the entire class is an exercise in enrollment. And you have to figure out, like I sell all day, every day. You're smiling. You have to be comfortable in articulating your vision like a movie producer, and selling it. And as Thomas said, sell it horizontally, sell it vertically, sell it to your peers, sell it to the, we got Stantec to work with us. They spent $75,000 of work to create those plans in one phone call. Sell.
My question is going to be a little more boring. As far as structuring a deal like this, you talk about it not penciling out in New York. How do you model something so innovative? Like, how do you think about, well, what's the revenue going to be like? What's the expenses going to be like? And how do you tell that story to financiers for them to be on board with the vision to finance?
What are you doing next week?
What are we going to do?
That's what I'm doing next week. And so what you do is you break it down into bite-sized pieces. You just get it done. Right? So this is just maybe 300 units of housing. So you run a housing model on that with a retail base. This is industrial. You run an industrial model. This is the hardest part, because you have to price out the equipment. And when I was working in the Bronx, I actually priced out the equipment piece by piece. So I got some food manufacturing guys to spec out bottling line by bottling line. So I actually already have those numbers. There is an AI called Perplexity that is helpful. And you just grind and get it done. I'm doing a hotel in East Harlem, so I've got hotel models, and this is work in progress. Like, what are you doing next week? So I'll let you know.
Awesome.
So I was going to ask about the financing, but I'm also curious about the internal metrics that you guys use in order to target that this is going to work out on your end, especially like underwriting concerns about that 40,000 square foot of like entrepreneurial, food service. I imagine there's a lot of risk and turnover for those small businesses. So how do you account for that risk and make sure that you guys are meeting internal metrics?
Working on it live, so that's one of the reasons that it's phase 2. Right? So start with the stuff you're nodding your head. The first part of the project is 200, 300 units of housing. Model that in your sleep. I'm a curator, not a creator. At some point in time, I will call PrEP, who is the leading operator of shared commercial kitchens in the Atlanta market. I already made an initial call to True Spice, which is one of the leading co-manufacturing that based on spices. So literally, at the right time, smile and dial, manage confidentiality. For the longest time, I kept this in my head because, it's actually not a complicated idea. The execution is the bear, right? And so what are the metrics? So that's one, call an expert. Number two, de-risk, 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 de-risk. So if I were doing this in New York, what I had planned to do, one of my partners, my manufacturing guy in New York, he already caters for schools. In New York, there are 1 million students. They all need to drink juice and eat sandwiches, right? So the first thing I would do if designated is go have a talk with the mayor's office and say that so one of the supermarkets we submitted with is in Atlanta. They do have a city-supported supermarket. It's privately run, but it's city-supported. We got a letter of support from them. And the first thing we'll do is, this is your city-supported supermarket. How many school lunch programs can we satisfy? Public-private partnership. De-risk, de-risk, de-risk. I haven't done it yet. Call me back and...
Thanks so much for sharing this with us. I'm so excited by this idea. How did you know, you said you've been thinking about this for many years, how did you know that this was the right time in your career to take this innovative leap? Was it, market forces, was it just the right time for you personally? Was it a mix of both professional and personal? How do you know when it's the right time to take an innovative leap like this?
This project and working on it is a tremendous risk and leap of faith. Because I could be doing affordable housing projects with significantly less brain damage and more financing. So on the personal side, my mother died around 55. And as I lived through that year, I just had this sense that these are bonus years and nothing is guaranteed. So if not now, when? I also, when I was having that feeling, I went to the Google. Now I don't do that, I just go to ChatGPT. But back then, I went to the Google and I looked up, I said, let me just read the story because this is it's very ambitious. I'm a little crazy. So because it's also a hotel brand. We're, creating the Village Spice hotel brand, while you're at it, just throw in another project. And I said, let me look up the life story of the founder of Aman Resorts, which is kind of my gold standard of the kind of hospitality brand I would like to build. And he started his company when he was 55 years old. So I said, yeah, here we go.
First of all, fantastic presentation. As a fellow developer, it's super exciting to see.
Thank you.
I want to first say how fantastic it is that you're so open to AI, especially in this field. I'm wondering, do you think that AI has the potential to potentially dilute the real estate industry in terms of taking jobs away it has in other spaces? I think AI has been a fantastic resource, but I'm not sure the direction it's going. So, just from your personal perspective, what do you think?
Thank you for asking that, because I meant to talk about that. A part of the design of Village Spice is an answer to AI. I think that AI is going to be job disruptive. So it's very important, especially in urban communities, for people to have an entrepreneurial way of life. that is why we have the Food Innovation Hub, is to give people that food independence. Where I think the marketplace needs to go, and when I get a little bit of sleep, one of the companies that I called, they're using semi-modular construction. So where I think projects like this need to go is you need to use artificial intelligence and modern construction techniques to drive the cost of construction down so that you can drive up the quality of experience. Right? So if I can build the residential for less, then that gives me the money to build a museum and to trick it out. So I support AI, but that is why we need new archetypes like Village Spice so that we have sustainable communities. Because the other part of Village Spice is that this is not that. Right? You could be in your room on your AI in a very isolated experience. That is why we have this. This is the answer to AI. Does that make sense?
And one more question.
So there's two kind of ideas of holding our heads on this wonderful presentation. The idea of shared kind of infrastructure, ownership, sharing, chief management officer, chief content officer, chief CFO, and I guess the idea of like shared ownership. And there's talking more about in terms of how profits are allocated, how control are allocated, and particularly when you kind of draw that inspiration from, in your case, Jamaican culture. I think oftentimes I've read more about there's oftentimes forms of shared ownership. And so I was just wondering, between those two models, where you see this fitting, is it really just the shared infrastructure, or is there aspects of shared ownership and control and more democratic form of operation that you're aspiring to?
I'm afraid they're going to ask me that question when we get an interview. It's complicated, right? The way that it's conceived is shared infrastructure, right? Because what I like to do is to separate, as they say in real estate, separate OpCo from PropCo. Separate the operating company, OpCo, from the property company, right? What we're doing is we're creating a platform where 2 or 3 people could come together and start their company on our platform, right? So that's where I see the shared ownership coming in. We give you the infrastructure for you to build your company. Where it's going to get interesting, and this is something that we were struggling with when we were getting ready to launch the Bronx, is it might come down when we have to pay for those early companies, when we have to come up with that shared marketing officer and basically operate as an accelerator. Accelerators do take a percentage of your business. So I think we will be looking to existing models of entrepreneurship that are taught right here to think about that question. I don't have the full answer, but I think it's going to be try as much as possible to make it infrastructure, and maybe bring in if there has to be collective ownerships, maybe have someone else run that. Maybe have a Blue Hub run that. Maybe have, you're nodding your head, maybe have Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, have someone from a more philanthropic perspective, or an accelerator, or like running that, right? Because, this is complicated. What I'm doing here is complicated enough that I always have to think about, I'm a curator, not a creator. Who is the right person to be doing this? And I'm not the right person to be doing that.
Thank you, everyone. Please let's give another round.